So the Orphan Trains of America was a social experiment slash program that occurred during the 19th century and the early 20th century. It happened here in the United States from 1854 to 1929. Even though similar events did happen throughout the world in different countries and in different continents, for example, in Europe, it was basically an attempt to relocate orphaned and abandoned children from crowded areas like cities on the East Coast and transport them to, non-populated areas or rural communities in the Midwest United States. So a lot of these children came from overcrowded orphanages. They came from the streets. They came as a result of family poverty because their parents couldn't take care of them. And again, officially, this movement was to move children from the cities to rural areas. So most of these children were transported and labeled as immigrants, interestingly enough. Another thing to note for later on in the video is that these children were called foundlings. A lot of them were called foundlings. It was a term used to refer to them. So keep that in mind for later on in the video. So a total of 250,000 children were relocated. It's estimated that the number is a little bit higher than that, but officially the number is 250,000. So here's where it gets interesting. The origin of these kids is a total mystery. A lot of these children that grew up and shared their stories of being on those trains and just their story in general. Again, there's a common theme surrounding a very large percentage of these stories, and that's the fact that these children or these people, they say that they have no recollection of their past or before. They don't have any memory of before they were transported on these trains. So it's not just one or two stories, right? It's literally the bulk of the people that were on these trains. There's plenty of interviews here on YouTube. There's plenty of stories in general of these people sharing their stories. And most of them say that they have no recollection of their past or, of any, they don't have any memories before they were transported on these trains. And yes, a lot of these kids were very young, 3-4 years old. But there's plenty of these children that look like, they were 6, 7, 8 years old, maybe even a little bit older. And, that's a strange thing to happen to somebody that age. I don't know about you, but I can definitely recall a few instances of my early childhood, when I was a teenager or even, earlier than that. So that's a strange thing to note and to keep in mind. So keep in mind that at this point in time, America is still very much in its infant stage. I don't think it had even celebrated its century mark of existence. It was still pretty much a country in development. So whenever a country rises up and is starting to head towards the direction of, becoming an important player in the world game, there's plenty of examples in the past of, a disposable workforce being needed to build the country up, to basically build the foundations, right? The central pillars of society. There's always, or in most cases, an expendable workforce that is needed to build the country up. So this is possibly a reason for this movement to occur. Now I'm just gonna go over a few interesting theories that I came across this subject. There's plenty of question marks surrounding this subject in general, and there are plenty of others who have done a more thorough job of investigating this subject. But I'm just gonna go over a few of the theories that I came across that I think hold some credibility, right? So the first theory that I came across is that these children were actually clones raised in the lab, and they were sent to populate isolated areas of the United States. Now, I know, if you're listening to this, it might sound completely insane, and I would have said the same thing, just a couple years back. But if society is at a point where animal cloning is definitely possible, and there existed civilizations that were a lot more advanced than the one we currently have, and that's a fact. I mean, you can do your own research on that and see what I mean. Civilizations that were way more technologically advanced existed in the past. I mean, the technology that is currently available to us is spectacular, of course, but if societies and civilizations existed that were way more advanced, this isn't something too far-fetched to consider that they were able to figure out how to clone human beings, right? If animal cloning is definitely looking like a possibility, and correct me if I'm wrong, it might already be a possibility or a reality in our current society. Again, it's not too far-fetched to suggest that cloning is actually possible. So that's the theory. So that's one of the theories surrounding this subject, that these children were actually clones raised in the lab, and that again explains why a lot of them don't have any recollection of where they came from. And an interesting parallel that I noticed is that the famous toy, the Cabbage Patch Kids, if you've ever heard of it, they're these dolls, and they basically the backstory of this toy is that these toys are children, and they're looking for homes to be raised in. They're orphans that were grown, or children that were grown, and are looking for homes, right? So that's the backstory of this toy. I mean, you can look into it yourself. So that's just one interesting thing that I noticed between this children's toy and this story. I mean, it might have no significant connection, but it's just an interesting thing to point out. Another interesting theory that I've heard surrounding this subject is that these children are being sent to these areas to populate them, and it's basically an attempt to build up the new world, right? To let go of the old world, or the previous civilization that existed here in America, and to establish the new world. If you look into major fires or major disasters that happened in the United States during the 1800s, again, there's definitely validity to this theory. Just to state one such example is the Chicago fire of 1871, the fire of New York during that time period. Again, all these strange coincidences, or these strange calamities just occurring in major cities, right? So that's the second theory, an attempt to destroy the old world and to build up the new one. So I stated this earlier on in the video, and that's the fact that there are plenty of examples throughout history of a disposable workforce being needed to accelerate the development of a new nation, right? Or to set the foundation of a nation, right? To develop it, there's usually a disposable workforce behind it. So again, that's another theory surrounding this subject, that of the disposable workforce, right? And if you take a look at some of the labor laws, or some of the non-existing labor laws during that time period, again, there's some validity to this theory. Just take a look at some of the pictures during that time period. I mean, you could have children as young as 5 years old, 4 years old, maybe even younger, just working in these awful conditions, right? In these coal mines. There's plenty of evidence of that occurring. And you take a look at the faces of these children, they just look so overwhelmed, overworked, and just sad, right? So again, that's the theory of the disposable workforce being needed to develop a new nation. Another theory that I came across surrounding this subject is that of it could have been an attempt to destroy any descendants or destroy any remnants of the old world or the previous civilization that existed, you know, prior to the United States. So this is another subject entirely, but there's overwhelming evidence of a more advanced civilization existing. And obviously, you're not going to hear about that in your history books. If you do your own research, again, you'll come across evidence that is overwhelming, right? So the theory states that this program was an attempt to destroy any remnants of or any descendants of that civilization. And an interesting point to connect to this theory is that during the 1800s here in the United States, there was a widespread construction of insane asylums, right, all throughout the United States. So the theory states that any people that didn't want to go along with the new program, so to speak, right, the new nation, any descendants of the previous civilization in general, those people were sent to these insane asylums, right, quote unquote, when they were actually prisons, right, and they were just kept there, and their children were sent to these orphan trains, right. So as a way to pretty much destroy any remnants of that old world, right, of that old civilization. So that's the last theory, or at least the last theory that I'll share with you regarding this subject. So if you're familiar with my channel, you know that I mention this video a lot, and it's called X Factor Winner Reveals World Secret Religion. And the reason I do so, it's because it's a very eye-opening video in the sense that it explains very well the reasons why truth is shown to us in plain sight, but it's usually labeled as science fiction or fantasy, or something that's away from reality, right? So if you haven't watched that video, I highly recommend it. It's quite a lengthy video, but again, it's worth every second. The guy just goes super into detail describing this issue, right? Why truth is shown to us in plain sight, and as well as many other interesting points. So I highly recommend it. I'm just going to go over some interesting parallels that I noticed in popular media surrounding this subject of the orphan trains, or just some interesting parallels that I noticed. So if you're familiar with the manga The Promised Neverland, you know that it revolves around these group of children that are basically kept in these orphanages, right? But they're actually prisons, and they are grown basically for the purpose of whatever their creators wanted, right? Whatever the people that are in charge of these orphanages wanted, right? So that's one interesting parallel that I noticed. Again, the concept of this old world being eradicated and this new world being built up, or a new world being built up. These children have no idea of the vastness of the world they live in. They're kept in a bubble, basically, and they're taught these things that don't correlate with reality, right? They're basically taught a fake reality, and they grow up believing in it, when the world is actually much more vast and complicated than what they were taught in their history books, right? Or just taught in general. Another interesting thing that I noticed is in the movie Guardians of the Galaxy 3, you have these genetically modified children, right? These orphanages, or these orphans that have no lineage, right? They have no descendants. They were basically created in labs. And if you haven't watched that movie, I recommend it. It's kind of a dark movie, but again, it's an interesting thing that I noticed, an interesting parallel surrounding this subject. If you made it this far in the video, thank you so much for listening. If you're new to the channel, welcome. I make videos like these. I just cover topics that I find interesting in general. So if you consider yourself open-minded and you don't get triggered when information that is, not very mainstream or goes against the grain, so to speak, is presented, if you don't get triggered when information like that is presented to you, then welcome to the channel. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you in the next one.